we've got to talk about this book and deceptive advertising. I have been a big fan of The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell and have read that series. So when this book was released, I thought, oh, cool, this is going to be a book of short stories that Cornwell was writing about the characters in the series. And they were just sort of stuff that he was, playing around with and decided to make a book of them. So I was really excited. This book was just released 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I go out and buy it even before it is on the market. I pre-order it. It comes. This book is 75% Anglo-Saxon recipes. um, here's the problem. I read all the blurbs. I read the back of the book. I read kind of what they were talking about in some of the different things. Nowhere did I get the impression that this book was going to be so much recipes and not much else. Even when you read the flyleaf on here, it talks about that he was... he'd been fascinated by elements of the Anglo-Saxon world that he couldn't fully explore. He tells additional Uhtred stories. He met this chef, Suzanne Pollock, and doesn't really go into detail. The flyleaf does not go into detail at all about the fact that this book is so much just Anglo-Saxon recipes. There are about 2 or 3 short stories, 3 or 4. I guess there's about 4 short stories in here that do involve Uhtred that are kind of just short stories that are canon but that are thrown in. That if you don't know the Last Kingdom series, if you haven't seen it on Netflix or been aware of that series that Cornwell has been writing for a long time, it is about a pagan at the very beginning of the creation of England that gets involved with Alfred the Great, and his name is Uhtred. And Uhtred was originally he is English, or English as it is known now, but he was raised, or sort of his older years, his teenage years, basically, teenage formative years, were spent with the Danes, and they were living in what is England now, and he was captured by the Danes, and one of them sort of raises him when he's older, and then Uhtred becomes involved he's a warrior, so he becomes involved in a lot of different political and sort of martial stuff that's happening at the very genesis of the creation of Angleland, as they kind of call it. And it's always been an interesting series because he has this very contentious relationship with Alfred the Great, that they do not see eye to eye on most things, and they really don't like each other on a lot of occasions, but they also do understand where the other one's coming from on some things that are very vital. And that becomes a big part of this series. And you just have this person in Uhtred who is sort of part of this original building of England, but also not part, because he is pagan. He's part of a dying kind of idea going on in England, and he has no problem with that, but he does bring a different attitude about how he's thinking about life and social interactions and all sorts of different things. So of course, when I'm thinking, oh, there's going to be a bunch of short stories, but it is a short story then interrupted by about 35 to 40 pages of Anglo-Saxon recipes. And yes, there is some history thrown in the beginning of these recipes, but this does feel a great deal like one of those books that slaps an author's name on it to produce something else. I'm looking at you, James Patterson. Because this feels very much like this is this woman's cookbook more than this is a book about the Last Kingdom characters, but it is marketed very much, at least in all the marketing that I saw, it is marketed very much like it is a Last Kingdom. Ooh, here's some short stories. Well, yeah, there's some short stories, but there's also a heck of a lot of recipes about lamb hock, and eels and whatever else. So I don't understand the marketing. I don't get it, because if you are a Last Kingdom fan, you're not going to be really impressed with the fact that most of this book is recipe. If you are somebody who's interested in cooking and interested in recipes, you don't know that that's in this book, because it's not being marketed as a cookbook tie-in to the Last Kingdom or Old English, very Old English cooking. I don't know what the goal was here, except to trick people. And that is what makes me kind of frustrated with this, is because it should have been marketed as a cookbook. There is not enough in this book to classify it to me as a Last Kingdom collection of short stories. Because a good 2/3 of this book is recipe. And the history behind recipe food from this era. And that is fine. I actually would have been even more okay with it had he been dealing with a bunch of different history things from this time period. If he had talked about a bunch of history stuff in here, interspersed between his short stories, and had people writing different essays about different nonfiction stuff in there, I would have been cool with that, because that at least kind of went along with, oh, he's getting backstory. He is looking into some of the history that he couldn't really put into the book. That's fine. But it's the fact that this is specifically food. I'm just sort of, I guess I should have been tipped off when it said Uhtred's Feast, but even the cover, yeah, there's a fire, but that does not immediately associate to me that we're going to be talking about roasting duck. That does not speak to that. That just speaks to there's a fire, and there's Uhtred's Thor hammer necklace on it, and that is the end result. I just can't quite wrap my head around what the idea was here, because the back blurb is really sort of very much talking about the last series as a series. Then they have the first line from the first book of the Last Kingdom, and it says about, he completes this epic with 3 wonderful short stories, accompanied by 80 fascinating recipes. That still does not seem like it should fill up a whole book. That seems like most of this book should be about the short story and not so much recipe writing, because when they talk about recipes, they're not just it's not just a page with a recipe on it. It's pages with this recipe talking about what to do and how to do it and this sort of thing. So I don't know. I guess I was expecting 3 novella type things in here, and then some pages of recipes in between, and maybe some history that he's talking about. And that's not what this is. So I don't know why they're marketing this or they marketed it like it was a short story book. Now, I did notice that on Book Hype it was originally on there like it was fiction, because Book Hype really only deals with fiction when they're doing pre-releases and stuff. We're talking about pre-releases and stuff like that. But they had this one on there, and then they ripped it down. After it was released, a week after it was released, they pulled it down off their site. And I wonder if that was because they realized that it is not really a fiction book either. I'm thinking surely I'm not the only one who saw this and thought this was going to be more short story than talking about, cuts of meat. I don't know. So, if you're interested in recipes, and if you're interested in cooking history from England and stuff like that the Anglo-Saxons would have been doing, perfect book. You could use this book for research. Fantastic. If you were looking for A lot more stories that fit into Last Kingdom, not worth your time, because these are even the short stories feel like kind of filler in the whole thing. So I don't know what this book is, and I don't know why this happened. Well, I do know why it probably happened. It was probably monetary, but just please market your books properly. Please make the blurb or the fly leaf at least tell me what you were about to talk about.